President Trump came into office promising to fuel an economic boom with a magic bullet: tariffs, taxes added to a wide range of imports. And the money is coming in, more than $30 billion a month.
We're doing well. Because of tariffs, we're doing unbelievable. We're making more money than we ever have made.
Consider this: 8 months into Trump's second term, it is unclear what the larger impact of these tariffs will be on the economy. Despite that, President Trump keeps promising to roll out new ones. It's Consider This from NPR. I'm Scott Detrow. For more on all of this, we're going to talk to NPR chief economic correspondent Scott Horsley. Hey, Scott.
Great to be with you.
So let's start with this week's news, this latest round of tariffs. Trump says he's rolling out new tariffs. What is the latest industry to be targeted?
Yeah, it can be hard to keep track. I think this week the president has threatened to impose new tariffs on softwood lumber, mostly from Canada, and on movies. The president apparently thinks that we're not producing enough movies in the United States, so he's threatened, not for the first time, to tax those foreign films, although it's not exactly clear how you would calculate those tariffs.
That gets to my next question, though. The president will threaten tariffs, then not implement them, or he'll put them into effect and then they'll be paused, or the courts will weigh in. This latest round, how likely do we think these are to actually be implemented, and how is industry responding?
Yeah, it is hard to say. As you point out, some of Trump's tariff threats never really materialize. He's threatened, for example, to tax foreign films before, and we didn't see any movement on that. But you can't just dismiss these tariff threats out of hand, because a lot of them he does follow through on. Mm-hmm. Last week, the president threatened to impose tariffs on name-brand pharmaceuticals and kitchen cabinets and big trucks. So the list of import taxes does continue to grow.
Let's rewind to the beginning of the year. What are the different areas that we have seen tariffs put in place already? Remind us of the greatest hits.
Oh, gosh, it's almost everything the United States imports, including a lot of things we don't really produce in our own country, like bananas and coffee. The Yale Budget Lab has kept a running tally of all the tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed, and it counts that the average tax rate right now on imported products is close to 18%. That's compared to about 2.5% at the beginning of the year before Trump went back to the White House. So this is the highest average tariff rate we've seen since the 1930s. And as you say, the president just keeps rolling out new import taxes.
1930s, not exactly a great decade when it comes to economics. Experts warned that these tariffs would shock the markets, that the world ran on free trade, and this would just gum everything up. And yet we are seeing at this point in time the stock market's surging. What do we know about the broader impact of these tariffs?
Yeah, the stock market's gain has been a turnaround, because when the president first started imposing these double-digit tariffs, investors were nervous, and we saw big drops in the market. In fact, the White House backed off some of its tariffs in response to those stock market drops. But more recently, Wall Street seems to have made its peace with the tariffs, at least for the time being. Taxing imports has put some upward pressure on inflation. Lumber tariffs, for example, are not going to help bring down the cost of housing, and adding a 50% tax on coffee from Brazil doesn't make your breakfast any cheaper. But investors seem to be saying that limited price increase is manageable. Some sectors of the economy are being hit harder than others, though. Manufacturing, in particular, has taken a beating. We just got a monthly report on the factory sector this morning from the Institute for Supply Management. And once again, they are saying tariffs are playing havoc with their businesses. It's odd because, domestic factories are supposed to be the beneficiaries of the president's trade policies. Instead, they've really been struggling. Farmers have also been hurting. China has not bought any soybeans from U.S. soybean farmers this year, and so grain prices are really depressed. Trump has actually talked about using some of the revenue that tariffs are bringing in to provide a lifeline for farmers, as he did the first time he was in the White House. Farmers would take that, but most of the farmers I talk to say they would rather have markets and trade rather than foreign boycotts and aid.
And that gets to another thing I was wondering. You've done a lot of these stories. I've done some stories as well, looking at individual businesses, trying to make long-term decisions, trying to plan months and years down the line. I went to a distillery in Virginia, and they're saying, we don't know when to order glass bottles. We don't know where to order it from, because week to week, the tariffs we're dealing with could be different. What have you seen big picture about how that paralysis in individual businesses is affecting consumers?
Well, yeah, as you say, it's just really hard to plan a business when you don't know what your costs are going to be a week from now, let alone 6 months from now. And if the president can impose a 50% tax via social media post, that's really worrisome. I've talked to importers who say they are just flying blind. They have to place orders with factories in Asia now, not knowing what the tariff rate's going to be next spring when the goods arrive at a port here in the United States. I've talked to importers who have thought about maybe shifting operations out of China, for example, to some other country, only to have goods from those countries now being taxed at even higher rates than Chinese products are. You have companies that have said they'd like to set up shop here in the United States, but they don't know what their competitive posture is going to be because the tariff target keeps changing. And then you've got companies like NVIDIA that are told they won't be allowed to sell their advanced computer chips to China unless they give the federal government a share of the proceeds. It's just a very unpredictable environment. And usually we say that when things are even more unpredictable than normal, that's not good for business.
One other unpredictable factor here is the eventual ruling we all anticipate from the Supreme Court on all of this. What can you tell us about that, what we've seen in the courts so far?
Yeah, the White House has justified most of the tariffs the president has ordered this year by pointing to a 1970s law known as IEEPA that never actually uses the word tariff. And opponents have argued that law doesn't actually give the president the authority to impose import taxes. All the courts that have looked at the case so far have agreed with those critics. And so now it's up to the Supreme Court, which is going to hold oral arguments in just over a month's time. If the high court agrees with the lower courts, then a lot of these tariffs will just go away, and the government may even have to refund some of that $30 billion a month that it's been collecting. Now, the White House says that would be catastrophic, but remember, until January, the government was charging an average tariff of less than 2.5%, and the Republic managed to endure. Even if the Supreme Court does rule against the president and these IEEPA tariffs, it doesn't mean there'd be no tariffs. The president still has authority to issue tariffs under other statutes. But it would take away sort of his most wild of wild cards.
I wanted to ask about two other big economic factors that are swirling around here. One is something we've talked a lot about. It's been one of the prevailing storylines in this Trump administration, and that is his big immigration crackdown. You have even had the president express some worries about how this is affecting the labor market. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's changed things in a big way. The number of people coming into the country has dropped sharply, while the number of people leaving the country, either voluntarily or because they're being deported, has gone up. And in fact, forecasters at the Brookings Institution and the American Enterprise Institute say there's a possibility that we will have a net outflow of immigrants this year for the first time in more than 6 decades. And that has enormous consequences for the job market and for the economy overall. For example, we have seen in recent months a big slowdown in the number of jobs that employers are adding. What we don't know is how much of that is because businesses don't want to hire as many people because they're not selling as many goods or services, or how much is because they're not finding as many would-be workers. It's probably some combination of that. And of course, immigrants don't just provide labor for the economy. They also shop and spend and pay taxes. So if there are a lot fewer immigrants, that has other economic consequences as well. It would be nice to have a really clear picture of what's happening, both with the job market and with the workforce. Unfortunately, a key report that would have come out on Friday with lots of useful information about exactly those things has now been postponed as a result of the government shutdown. So we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to know what's going on with the labor market.
And of course, that's one other economic factor here. You have scores of federal employees who won't be receiving paychecks. President Trump is threatening to fire many federal employees. Any sense, since we have the luxury of having been through many shutdowns at this point, any sense how a government shutdown affects or complicates an economic situation?
Well, historically, government shutdowns have not had enormous macroeconomic effects. They're a disruption. They cause some temporary displacement. Ultimately, the federal workers get back pay. So the macroeconomic effects tend to be pretty limited. That could certainly change if the Trump administration were to follow through on plans to impose mass layoffs and really remake the federal workforce. We've already seen hundreds of thousands of federal workers cut so far into this administration. If we add to that, the impact could be more. But the economic data is another factor here. You know, the government produces all sorts of economic indicators on the job market, on inflation, on GDP. Those are all compiled by government workers, and they're not being compiled during this government shutdown. And so we're at this moment where we're at this really sensitive time for the economy. The job market appears to be slowing down. Inflation's picking up. Policymakers at the Federal Reserve, for example, are trying to figure out how to navigate through these choppy water. And now some of their key navigational instruments have been covered up with black electrical tape that's marked government shutdown. And so, you know, they're flying blind. A lot of businesses are flying blind. To be sure, there are other sources of economic data. There are private sources. There are various other places you can go. But nobody has the reach of the Labor Department and the Commerce Department that go out there and survey tens of thousands of businesses and households every month and put all that information together for us. It's a real public good, and we're going to have to do without it as long as this shutdown lasts.
That is Scott Horsley, NPR's chief economic correspondent. Scott, thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
And if you want more conversations like this, like and subscribe to our channel and check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much. Is that a bigmouth bass on your, does it sing?
Oh yeah, no. I think the batteries are dead. Or I probably took the batteries out to stop them from. But yeah, and it. Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry, be happy.
What's the tariff situation on Billy Bigmouth basses? Are they
HO in China? Good thing I got this when I did, because it'd be 30% more now.